Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network, based in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
We're going to talk to City Council member and former WABC colleague Frank Morano about whether it's a win or not. This is the mayor, Lewis, cut number 2.
Yes, I see this as a win, not just for our administration, but for the city of New York. A win to ensure that the city is back on firm financial footing.
It is.
And it's doing so by taxing the rich, by creating a fairer relationship with Albany.
Ew. All right, so he claims it's a win. And I think Frank Morano is actually smarter than he is. I don't care if he went to Brooklyn Tech. I really do. Frank, is the mayor right? $125 billion budget, one in which you guys in the city council have the power to say, nope, ain't going to happen here. From what you see, Frank Morano, is it a win for the mayor and New York City?
Sid, good morning. First of all, thanks for having me on, and congratulations on the incredible interview with President Trump. Everybody's talking about it literally all over the world, and I don't think people would be surprised if President Trump, when he's with Xi Jinping later, actually were to hand the phone to Xi Jinping to have Xi Jinping call you. That's kind of the level that your show is at right now.
It's not crazy. That's not crazy.
No, it's not. Yeah. No, for anybody but Trump, it would be. But so as far as this budget, this is just crazy. Everything about this is crazy. A few months ago, we were talking. We were told New York City was facing the fiscal equivalent of an event-level extinction event, an asteroid, $12 billion budget hole, property tax hikes, supposedly unavoidable, end-of-the-world rhetoric. We're going to raid the rainy day fund, which is supposed to be only used for things like a major crisis. And now, suddenly, the property tax hike is gone. The rainy day fund rate is gone. Albany found like magic billions of dollars, and everybody's declaring victory, nobody more so than the mayor. So, first of all, I'm glad homeowners dodged that bullet of a property tax hike because that would have been devastating. But this whole episode raises a ton of questions. It's laughable. The biggest thing New Yorkers need to understand is this. State money is not magic money. It's still taxpayer money. It's just routed through Albany first. So if somehow Governor Hochul found $4 billion to bribe the voters with.
By the way, that would be $4 billion for this year. She actually found double it, $8 billion over a 2-year period.
That's exactly right. And so don't shortchange your own math abilities. I saw you giving the disclaimer that you're not Larry Kudlow or Charles Gasparino. Even Sid Rosenberg knows the difference between $4 billion and $8 billion. But this is crazy. Now, instead of the taxpayers of just New York City getting hosed, the taxpayers of all New York State are subsidizing the lavish spending of New York City. But in all seriousness, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. Just think about this. And I know, even though you're obviously conservative, you do have a lot of Democrats and independents that listen to you every morning because I hear from them. But think about this. We went from a $12 billion crisis to then $7 billion. To then $5 billion in a matter of just weeks, right? It was like Joseph McCarthy constantly changing the number of communists that were in the State Department. And now, apparently, the gap is basically closed. And that tells me this was at least partly a messaging exercise, not a math exercise. This was an attempt to scare politicians and scare the voters into raising taxes. But yeah, again, and that's what the mayor proposed to us when he briefed the members of the city council on this a few months ago. He said, if you don't go with this big tax hike for corporations and high income earners, then we're going to have to raise property taxes on everybody. And you wouldn't like that, would you?
Wait a second. Is he a moron? Does he realize that when he threatened you with property tax increases, that you, the city council, led by Julie Menin, you have the ability to make it go away? You didn't realize that?
Well, I think he thought all the progressives were going to roll over. And lo and behold, even a lot of the progressives weren't eager to give their own constituents a property tax hike. So what I've been saying from the beginning is to you and others is before you threaten property tax hikes, before you drain reserves, which would have had a devastating impact on New York City's credit rating, by the way, before you nickel and dime New Yorkers to death, government has to seriously examine spending. And look, there have been some minor cuts here. They're more kind of rounding errors, honestly, between every agency. We could go much deeper. But what actually closed the gap here? It's not this fiscal wizardry that the mayor's putting in. It's Albany aid, this magic pot of money that Kathy Hochul found, delayed pension payments, by the way, which could put us, which everybody's calling a gimmick, even the Citizens Budget Commission, which is pretty nonpartisan, which could put us in a hole going forward. It's a couple of agency savings, which I'm all for, some targeted cuts, which I'm all for, and then a whole bunch of mini taxes and fees. And that's very different from what we were originally told. So what the mayor's done here is he's really become the boy who cried wolf. Nobody will ever take the mayor seriously, and I mean the public and politicians, in future budget briefings, because we now know he's going to say and threaten whatever he needs to in order to try to raise taxes. Just one quick point on the pension delay. That pension delay really does concern me. It's not as much as a massive property tax hike, but balancing today's budget by pushing pension costs into the future is basically handing the bill to future taxpayers. So people should be aware of that, and that's not something that a lot of people are talking about today. But the administration, they moved from panic mode to patchwork mode, and what we still need from both the city council, quite frankly, who I think has been pretty solid on this, and the mayor, is we need reform mode. Nobody's talking about reforming New York City's crazy spending process when that's what we need to do.
Give me an example then, Frank, because you really are great and smart. Give me an example of reform mode. Give me something practical that you'd like to see the mayor do in the spirit of, quote, reform that would help the city.
Well, one thing that he actually said during the campaign and his budget director, Sharif Solomon, brought up again during the budget hearings, which I'm actually for, is changing how the property tax systems are evaluated. Now, my constituents in Staten Island are paying a lot more in taxes on a modest one or two family home than the mayor's constituents would be in places like Park Slope and the gentrified areas. He said he wants to change that, and that's why it was so laughable to me that he won those neighborhoods so big, because the gist of his whole property tax plan, which was also Joe Borelli's property tax plan, by the way, is soaking those folks and having them pay more, and they were only too happy to vote for him. So that's one area where we've actually already agreed. But what I think we need to do beyond that is change the structure of government spending instead of lurching from crisis to crisis every budget season, because it's not unique to Mamdani. Adams did the same thing. So, for example, I think we need to eliminate thousands of long vacant positions that agencies admit they're never going to fill, but that's still in the budget. We need to consolidate a whole bunch of duplicative agencies and office space. Everything that says mayor's office of blank could be eliminated because there's already an agency and a city council committee that does that. Procurement reform, number one. The city is dramatically overpaying contractors on everything. A lot of these contracts, no bid contracts, by the way, and that's taxpayer money. There's a disaster going on in the city when it comes to overtime controls and audits. We have a new controller. He's a liberal Democrat, but he seems like a smart guy and an honest guy, much better than Brad Lander. I'm hoping he does something about that. We need to totally streamline our city technology systems. So many of our systems are running straight out of the 1990s. And most importantly, from Albany's perspective, is we need class size mandate relief from Albany. You know, I heard Mr. Novak in the last day or two, and I heard Noam last week talking about the dwindling public school enrollment numbers, and yet we're spending more than ever because they are mandating the class size to the tune of $1 billion. So the bottom line, I think, Sid, is we need to review programs that keep growing every year without measurable results. I think when John Katsimatidis ran for mayor in 2013, that was actually one of the things that he talks about. But we need to audit all this underused real estate in New York City and leased office space, especially with more and more city workers working remotely, or at least having the ability to work remotely. We have a crazy situation of this massive government that seems to perpetuate itself in perpetuity. Irrespective of what money is coming in, it still keeps growing and growing and growing. You know, the mayor said he wanted a rent freeze. He wanted to, or limit it to 1.5% this year. What if we went along with that, as long as we only limited the growth of government spending to 1.5%? And I'm only talking about discretionary government spending. I'm not even talking about things like pension payments and things like that. We are out of control, and nobody is talking about a broad reform of the system, which is what we need. Reform mode means focusing on long-term savings, not temporary gimmicks. Long-term, ideally recurring savings.
I also saw as part of this budget, and again, I don't know all the details as well as you do, this executive budget where the mayor is saying that the city has closed the gap here. I saw him put down numbers that are based on potential deals. In other words, not done yet, but hey, the city just found $500 million. Where did they find that $500 million? Well, it goes back to this conversation I had with the president on this show yesterday. Lewis, cut number 4.
Do you know Ken Griffin, Mr. President?
I do.
I figured you did because he's a very successful man, a great man just like you. And he wants to do a $6 billion project right here on Park Avenue. And who loves Park Avenue more than you? And you've got the mayor, this guy outside of his residence, and he does a whole film. And Ken Griffin goes above and beyond the fact that he just humiliated me. And I'm a billionaire looking to spend money in New York City. It's unsafe. He's doing a video from the front of where I live. And now Ken Griffin is thinking about taking that $6 billion project for a city, President Trump, that's $5.4 billion in debt, and taking that to Miami. How does that make sense?
Well, I do know Ken, and Ken's an amazing businessman, one of the best, and you don't want to lose people. He also pays a lot of taxes, like me. Right. We pay a lot of taxes, and you know when you lose people like that, it's sort of not recoverable. Always you say something's recoverable, right? But it's not recoverable. Then they build something else. They're going to be there for 30 years. They don't come back. And you've got to do the opposite. You've got to cherish them. You got to bring them to the office. You got to meet them. You have to have dinner with them. You have to convince them not to leave. You're going to make their life great. You're going to help them with their building, with their project. You got to do it. And I don't know if it's not hard to do, but maybe it is for some people. But you don't want to lose people like Ken. That would be a big loss for New York.
So it looks like in this budget that they're counting on $500 million based on this second home tax. I don't know how to say it in French. I just don't care.
Pied-à-terre tax. Yeah.
Thank you. So is that pretty much stitch in already? That's done?
No. Great points all by both you and the president there. For starters, let's talk about how the mayor marketed this whole thing. He could be for the pied-à-terre tax, right? The people have been talking about it for years, and I understand the appeal. I don't think it's a good idea, but I understand the appeal. But the way that he did this, going outside of Ken Griffin's home, pointing at his house and saying, essentially, this guy is the bad guy, this guy is the villain, this guy is to blame for all your problems, especially in light, as you pointed out, a year or so after the murder of the United CEO, Brian Thompson, in Manhattan itself. It was so irresponsible. And for a movement that claims they want to, bring down the rhetoric and they love to criticize President Trump, it was so reckless. And it really stokes the flames of class warfare in an incredibly irresponsible way. And the mayor ought to be ashamed of himself for that. But in terms of the policy, by the way, what the president said there, 100% right. The mayor in history that raised taxes more than any other mayor was Mike Bloomberg. And yet, at the same time he was raising taxes, because it was a fiscal crisis, he did exactly what the president described. He went and visited with every entrepreneur, every business leader, every major property holder, and begged them to stay in New York. And you know what? Almost all of them did, even with they were getting soaked with an 18.5% property tax hike. What now you're seeing is with this pied-à-terre tax, which, by the way, they're saying it won't even generate $500 million. Two, it's far from a sure thing, as even Jumaane Williams pointed out. I haven't heard Kathy Hochul necessarily say that she's on board with this, because a lot of the people that would be paying this are her donors. But what they're talking about with this pied-à-terre tax on second homes, I understand why that polls well politically. People hear luxury apartment tax and think it only affects billionaires. They think it only affects an Arab sheik that comes to New York City one weekend a month and they have this big property here. But these taxes always get sold as temporary or narrowly targeted, and somehow they always spread. So she didn't agree to this pied-à-terre compromise yesterday. And my concern, though, is the broader message. If you invest here, if you own property here, if you succeed here, government increasingly sees you as a target instead of a partner. You don't build a stronger city by putting a kick me sign on the backs of the taxpayers, the taxpayers that are funding the very programs that the mayor says he wants to help lower income New Yorkers. Even a lot of these experts are saying the revenue projections from this tax are overly optimistic. Government always assumes taxpayers are going to sit still and happily pay more, and real life doesn't always work that way.
No, it doesn't. So in the final 30 seconds, much like the property tax increase, you guys can make sure that doesn't happen. You can also make sure this $125 billion budget doesn't happen either. What do you think the city council does here?
Well, a lot of this is dependent upon Albany aid right now, so a lot of this is going to be up to the governor and the state legislature. But on the council front, I think there was enormous pushback against both the property tax hike and raiding the rainy day fund. So I think if they present us with a budget that doesn't do either of those things, especially if it doesn't result in massive cuts to, things like libraries or other programs that people that care about, then I think they're likely to approve it. But again, the taxpayers around the state have to be asking, how much do I want to subsidize New York City? If I'm a Long Islander, if I live upstate and I see my property taxes go up year after year, and I see Kathy Hochul giving an $8 billion gift to Mamdani, do I really want that reflected in my tax bill? I wouldn't think so.
No, I think you're right. Nobody better. Nobody could have done a better job. Nobody than you just did in the last 15 minutes. Frank Morano, as always, great work. Thank you so much, and keep fighting for our city, man. We need more people like you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. It is great to be on with you as always, and congratulations again on the phenomenal interview with President Trump.
I think yours was just as good. How about that, Frank?
Nobody else does.
Well, I do. Me. Have yourself a great day. Thank you. That's an excellent job.
Thanks for listening to Sid and Friends in the Morning. You can hear Sid and Friends in the Morning weekday mornings at 6. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
I got into a Genesis. This is luxury. Whether it's a sleek G70 or the GV80 with that third row, these are high-end vehicles with payments that actually make sense. Go see Michael. Tell him Sid sent you. Genesis of Brooklyn. Find him at genesisofbrooklyn.com.